What is happening, everybody? In this video, I'm going to be breaking down this weekend's UFC fight card, which is headlined by Taira Taira taking on Alex Perez. If you can do me a favor as you're watching this, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Break down all the fights to give you all the information that you need to know to build your DraftKings lineups this weekend, and also talk about some bets along the way as well. We did a giveaway last week for a free Odd Shopper subscription, and the winner is JWJ5SN. Sounds like an automated bank password or something like that. But Jay, congrats. You ended up a really sharp take, by the way. He had Punahele Soriano. He picked him to score the most fantasy points on last week's card. Nobody else guessed Soriano. And I mean, Soriano probably still landing ground and pound over Miguel Baeza right now, but he racked up just an insane amount of significant strikes on the ground against Miguel Baeza. And the ref just kind of let it go on for Punahele Soriano to just beat the absolute living shit out of Miguel Baeza in that spot. So, Jay, big win for you. DM me on Twitter so I could create you a link to get you a free subscription to Odd Shopper. And we'll do a giveaway this week as well. We've been doing these weekly. For this week, only 11 fights on the card. A couple of them have been scratched for a couple of reasons. The Ulanbekov-Van fight, that was scratched because it looked like Ulanbekov was sick on the scales. And then obviously we also had the Ikram Aliskerov fight. That one got scratched so that Aliskerov could step in for Khamzat Chimaev on next weekend's card and fight in the main event against Robert Whittaker. So 11 fight card. Here's what we're going to do. How many underdogs do you guys think win? Let me know below in the comments section. You don't have to say who all the underdogs are. If you think there's going to be 3 upsets, say 3. If you think there's going to be 5, say 5. You get the idea. And then we'll figure out who gets the answer correct. If there's multiple correct winners, I'll randomize it and pick somebody randomly doing it that way. But let's break down the card now. 11 fights. Let's get to it. And I do have a bet right off the bat in the first fight of the, well, not the first fight, but the main event. First fight that we're talking about here. I think the line's a little bit too wide. You could bet Alex Perez on the money line right now in plus 170. And Alex Perez has always been extremely talented. He's just never been super active. And it's something we've seen numerous pullouts out of Alex Perez. We've seen a lot of issues in the past with just inconsistencies in terms of booking fights. But all of a sudden, the guy's been really active this year. He fought in March against Muhammad Mokaev. It was a very competitive decision that he lost, but Mokaev is somebody who a lot of us expect is going to be challenging for the title soon. And Alex Perez himself is a former title challenger. Then he comes back on just a month and a half's notice, takes on Matus Nicolau in a main event, ends up knocking out Nicolau, and now another short notice fight here on against Taira Taira in another main event. And I like the activity for Alex Perez because he is a fighter that I've been high on in the past when he's been active. And Taira's a prospect that I'm really high on as well. 15-0. He's probably the best Japanese prospect that we have in all of MMA right now. Here's the one downside to Taira, though. He's only 23 years old. He doesn't have very much high-level experience. 24 years old. He doesn't have a ton of high-level experience. We've never seen him in a main event. And while I'm really high on him as a prospect, he's nearly a minus 200 favorite in this fight. And I think this line is based more on what Taira Taira could be and what his upside is based on compared to like what I think the most likely outcome is, which is a very good fighter. But I'm not ready to say that he should be a nearly minus 200 favorite against Alex Perez, who, like I said, Alex Perez, former title challenger. And another reason why I think this is a pretty favorable matchup for Perez. Taira has shown to be pretty inexperienced in the striking. He did look good on the feet in his last fight against Carlos Hernandez. It was by far the most comfortable he's looked on the feet, and he did end up getting a second-round finish, outstruck Hernandez 33-2. But this is a big step up in competition, taking on Alex Perez. And I do expect Perez to have a big striking advantage. Taira does have a big grappling advantage, but here's the issue. While Taira is a very good grappler, he is not the best wrestler. And Alex Perez does have a wrestling background. He has 82% takedown defense. So I do think it could be difficult for Taira to land takedowns. And if that's the case, I'm going to give Perez the advantage on the feet. So I think this is probably closer to a 50-50 fight. I'm really interested to see where Taira Taira is. It would be really cool if he came out with an impressive win. Then we've got this young prospect who's probably ready for a title fight, if we're being honest, if he ends up looking impressive over Alex Perez. I just don't think that's the most likely outcome. So I'm going to be higher on the Perez side. Something else that's important with this being an 11-fight card is ownership really matters. There's going to be a ton of dupes. Taira's projected for 53% ownership due to the scratch fight. We've got 33% projected ownership going to Alex Perez. So I like being overweight to Perez. I currently have him at about 60% of my lineups to 40% for Taira Taira. Also betting Perez plus 170 on the money line. I think that's a good long odds bet where it should really be closer to a pick 'em fight, in my opinion. Co-main event is not one of the fights that I'm all that excited about from a DFS perspective. There's been a lot of line movement towards Miles Johns over the course of the week, where he's now gone anywhere from like a minus 140 to minus 145 favorite. The problem with this fight for me from a DFS perspective, even though both these guys have potential to finish and they both have a lot of power, is that neither of them have the best cardio. And as a result, neither of them do a whole lot. Miles Johns lands 3.28 significant strikes per minute. Andrade lands 3.66. Typically, neither of them really look to wrestle all that often, and both of them have good takedown defense as well. So even though it's a fight where, sure, there's an outcome where one of them could clip the other one on the feet, it ends in a pretty big score and a finish, there aren't that many opportunities when both these guys are just landing somewhere around 3 significant strikes per minute. The betting odds also favor this fight to go the distance, about minus 150 to go to the judges' scorecards. So with that being the case, there's other fights I prefer to target. It's hard to write off a fight entirely on an 11-fight card, but I do currently have sub 20% exposure to both Douglas Silva de Andrade as well as Miles Johns. And Johns is projected for north of 30% ownership, which is going to be influenced by all the line movement we've seen over the course of the week. So there is a little bit of reason to be higher on the Douglas Silva de Andrade side just for the leverage when ownership is so important. But I'm not going to be very high on either fighter in the co-main event. The next fight that we have here, it is Timothy Kawamba against Lucas Almeida. And there's a pretty clear game plan to beating Almeida, and it is he does not have good takedown defense. He doesn't have a very good get-up game. So if you are able to land takedowns against Almeida, you're probably going to end up beating him. Here's the issue, though. We have now seen Kawamba fight a couple of times, once on the Contender Series, once in the UFC, and he's only landing 0.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. So I don't know if he's the guy to exploit the 40% takedown defense of Lucas Almeida. And when the fight does take place on the feet, I think Almeida is the cleaner striker. I also think he has more power. I think he could win by decision. I think he could potentially win by knockout. So if Kawamba looks to land takedowns, he might be able to do it. We just haven't seen a lot of evidence that it is a game plan he can implement. So with that being the case, I'm going to be picking Lucas Almeida to win. Not super confidently, but he is definitely my preferred side in DFS. And another side also where we're getting some leverage. Kawamba projected for 35% ownership, whereas Almeida is only projected for 27%. So I'm going to be a little bit higher on the Almeida side. He's a punt option that I like getting to. I think he's live for a knockout. And then even in a striking-based win, there's enough output there where he lands over 5 significant strikes per minute, where I think we could see a pretty decent score for a card that only has 11 fights. This is another fight that I think is a pretty good one to target, Brady Heistand against Garrett Armfield. The reason being is that Brady Heistand is not a guy who I'm super high on as a fighter in real life purposes. Like, I don't think he's going to be a ranked fighter or a title contender at any point, but he's got a pretty friendly fighting style for DraftKings scoring. Brady Heistand lands north of 4 takedowns per 15 minutes. If you look at some of the other fights that have gotten out of Brady Heistand, in a fight against Bakary Dinah's last time out, Dinah beat the crap out of him in the early going, and then we saw Heistand rally late to get a third-round finish. He lands 3 takedowns in that fight. Against Fernie Garcia, he landed 3 takedowns. Really, honestly, wasn't the greatest look for Heistand because Fernie Garcia is not somebody who's UFC caliber. And then we also saw when he fought in the tough finale against Ricky Turcios, he landed 6 takedowns. It's a bad loss because he lost to Turcios in that fight, but still, it is important to me that we've now seen him land 3 and 6 takedowns. So 12 takedowns over the course of his 3 UFC fights. With that being the case, anytime you see Brady Heistand win a fight, it's going to come from takedowns, and Garrett Armfield only has 64% takedown defense. On the other side, though, Heistand is very poor striking. He's poor striking defense, and he gets hurt a lot. So I just mentioned before, I should have stayed on this page, but we saw in the fight against Turcios, not only did he lose, Brady Heistand also got knocked down in that fight. In his win against Bakary Dinah, he also got knocked down in that fight as well. So he's been dropped in 2 out of his 3 UFC fights now. And considering that Garrett Armfield's striking has looked really, really good in his recent fights, we saw him win on the feet against Brad Katona. Katona did still take him down 4 times. And then also he looked really, really good in his win over Kazama, which was just a dominant first-round finish there. So if Garrett Armfield is able to keep the fight on the feet, I think he probably finishes Brady Heistand, but then you have to like Heistand's ability to land takedowns and potentially score well for DraftKings as well. I am going to be picking Armfield to win. I think him winning by finish is the most likely outcome, but it's definitely a fight I want to have both sides of. I have nearly 30% of Brady Heistand and nearly 40% of Garrett Armfield in the lineups that I've built so far. Next fight that we have here to talk about, it is Asu Almabayev taking on Jose Johnson. Johnson made weight and looked relatively decent on the scales. His frame makes no sense for this division. I mean, how he was able to cut down to 125 pounds at 6 feet tall with a 71-inch wingspan, it's pretty crazy. It is at least somewhat interesting if he looks decent in the fight tomorrow. But this is a really poor stylistic matchup for Jose Johnson. Asu Almabayev is a very, very good prospect. He's got a great wrestling and grappling base. He's landing north of 7 takedowns per 15 minutes. And he's going up against Jose Johnson, who only defends takedowns at a 36% clip. And considering the size advantage Johnson has, I do think it's going to be pretty easy for Almabayev to get in on his legs. Almabayev is expensive, but he's a very worthwhile pay-up option. I'm not really taking very many shots on Jose Johnson. Almabayev is my favorite overall spend-up option in this slate. He's currently in over half of my lineups. Next fight that we have here, it is Josh Quinlan against Adam Fugate. This is my favorite fight to target in the mid-range. If Quinlan's able to keep it on the feet, I think he probably knocks out Adam Fugate, but I don't think he's going to be able to keep it on the feet. He only defends takedowns at a 60% clip. Quinlan also, we've seen him fatigue in the later stages of a lot of his fights. And Fugate could fight hard for 15 minutes, and he's going to be relentless with the takedown attempts. So we've seen some of these spots for Fugate in the past where he's had to grind out wins. And I think we could see him do it again. We saw him in the fight against Kinoshita, where he did end up getting a first-round finish, also landed 4 takedowns in that fight. Fugate does a lot, throws a lot of significant strikes, lands a lot of takedowns, shoots a lot of takedowns. He's very active. I don't know that Quinlan's going to be able to keep up with that pace. If Quinlan does win, it's probably going to be a first or second round finish, but I'm going to pick Fugate to win. I'm going to say either by decision or maybe even a third round submission just by being able to tire out Josh Quinlan, but really, really good fight to target here as well. I've got Fugate in nearly 40% of my lineups. Also got Quinlan at about 30%. Between the two of them, Quinlan is expected to be slightly more popular. Nothing crazy, though, just like a percentage point or two higher. So I'll go with the slightly lower-owned Adam Fugate to win in this fight, and another one that I think should score very well no matter who wins for DraftKings purposes. Jimmy Flick against Nate Maness, and I was pretty high on Jimmy Flick in his last fight against Malcolm Gordon, which even though he ended up winning, and it ended up being a really good cash. Had him to win by submission, which was pretty long odds. Had him at money line, which is like plus 175 or something like that. But I did come away thinking like I dodged a bullet there because Jimmy Flick, while he won against Malcolm Gordon, he looked terrible. And Malcolm Gordon just kind of tired out and ended up getting finished in the second round. But Gordon was dominating the entire fight up until the time that Jimmy Flick finished him. And I just don't think Jimmy Flick is a UFC caliber fighter. He's a good enough grappler to where he is occasionally going to find himself in advantageous positions that are going to allow him to get submissions to win fights. But I don't know that this is going to be the spot against Nate Maness. I'm not even super high on Maness or anything like that, but he defends takedowns well, nearly 80% takedown defense, and Jimmy Flick just has zero durability. So I do think what we're going to see is Nate Maness probably defend some early takedowns, and then is going to be able to hurt Jimmy Flick, probably knock him out in the first or second round. So another fighter in the high end that I'm pretty high on. Nate Maness in 43% of my lineups. And this is something that by being overweight to the field on Alex Perez, I'm able to get overweight to these other high-end fighters. So because Alex Perez is projected for 33% ownership and I have 60% of them, I have over 50% of Almabayev, who's projected for 36% ownership. And then I have over 40% of Nate Maness, who's projected for 34% ownership. So if you are higher on Perez in the main event, it does put you on entirely different builds from the rest of the field. Next fight here, it is going to be Carly Judice against Gabriela Fernandez. And Fernandez, I feel like that this is a very common talking point for this card. It's just, hey, one fighter has really poor takedown defense. Will their opponent be able to exploit it? And Fernandez only has 61% takedown defense, but we've never really seen Judice wrestle all that much or aggressively. So I think this fight probably takes place on the feet. And if that's going to be the case, I think it's going to be just a fairly low-scoring kickboxing fight. And then Fernandez, I do favor her to win, but considering how expensive she is, I'd rather roster Almabayev. I'd rather roster Nate Maness. I mean, I'd rather roster Taira Taira. We're going to be talking about Jekka Saragih and Weston Wilson in a second as well. There's so many other pay-up options that I like that is going to keep me from getting to Fernandez. So Judice is the side for DraftKings purposes just because she is a punt play that's so cheap. She's only plus 140 on the money line. So she has pretty good win equity. And if she does win, that's going to make her fairly live for the winning lineup. But I do favor Fernandez to win. It's just a fight that I'm going to find it difficult to get to. I've got Fernandez in about 20% of my lineups right now, Judice in 17%, and I'll probably be even lower on the Fernandez side and the Judice side when we get closer to lock tomorrow, as I try to find other ways to find upside for my lineups outside of just going to this fight that I don't think the winner is going to score all that well in. The next fight here is one that we definitely want to be playing. Jekka Saragih against Weston Wilson. The fight is anywhere from like minus 750 to minus 800 to finish inside the distance. I think Saragih probably knocks out Weston Wilson. With that said, though, I am not high on Saragih at all. He has big power. He's got a big left hand, but I don't really think he has any other tools to his game. He doesn't have much output. I mean, we saw him when he fought against Anshul Jubli. He ended up getting overwhelmed, and he actually gassed in the second round of that fight as well. And then if you guys remember Jubli's last fight, he looked okay against Mike Breeden in the first couple of rounds and then just like totally melted down and fell apart and got finished in the third round of that fight. So I don't think Jubli is all that good. And he ended up beating Jekka Saragih pretty comfortably in that fight. So I don't think either of these guys are UFC caliber. I don't think Saragih is. And Weston Wilson has looked absolutely awful so far in his UFC fights. Not that he's been given the best opportunities to win, because he had to fight Joe Anderson Brito on short notice, and then he got a follow-up fight against Gene Silva, and these were two guys who were able to defend takedowns, have big power on the feet. Weston Wilson with questionable durability. He got finished in the first round of each of those fights. Because Jekka Saragih has big power, I think he does the same thing and finishes Weston Wilson, but I don't want to write off Wilson either, just because Saragih, like I said, is not somebody I rate all that highly. And there's a scenario where Weston Wilson ends up in top in a weird scramble and ends up getting a submission. I did consider betting Weston Wilson by submission. The problem, though, is the odds are so short, it's basically the same as what his money line is. So it made it so that I didn't really think there was any real value betting that particular prop. If Wilson wins, though, it's probably going to be a first or second round submission. I really like being overweight to both sides of this fight. Weston Wilson only projected for 18% ownership. And then on the other side, we've got Jekka Saragih projected for 29% ownership. I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers go up by the time we get closer to the fights on Saturday. But as of right now, I'm pretty well overweight to both sides of this fight. And I wouldn't even mind being higher on them and going like 10% higher on each of these fighters. Next fight we have, it is Mel Costa against Shailen Nuerdanbieke. And I don't really have a great read on this fight, to be honest with you guys. Mel Costa, I'm going to favor to win just because he is more active. He looks to wrestle and grapple more. He's also more active with the striking on the feet. But on the Nuerdanbieke side, I do think that he is the better athlete who possesses more power. So he's probably a little bit more live for a finish in this spot. Because of the activity, I'm going to pick Costa to win. I'm going to pick him to win by decision. But also because it's a fight that I'm not super confident in, and I don't think it has the most finishing equity, I'm not getting to a whole bunch of it. I've got Costa in 24% of my lineups right now. And then Nuerdanbieke also only in 7% of lineups at the moment. So not a fight that I'm targeting all that heavily. Next fight we have, which is actually the first fight on the entire card / the final fight that I'm going to be breaking down here. Josephine Knutsson taking on Julia Polastri. And I like Knutsson to win here. I think she wins by decision. It's also going to be a fighter who's hard for me to pay up for, kind of in the same vein as Gabriela Fernandez, where I like her to win, but I don't think she has a lot of finishing equity. She's a very, very well-rounded fighter, but also doesn't fight with the most urgency. She's not necessarily going out there looking to put away her opponents. She's a point fighter. She's getting ahead, winning rounds, and outworking her opponents. But it's a kind of fight style that I don't think is going to score especially well on DraftKings for the course of her career. Her last fight against Marnik Man, which was a really, really low-level opponent, she lands 81 significant strikes and 3 takedowns. Then you go to her Contender Series fights. She lands 53 significant strikes and 1 takedown. Then in her first fight on the Contender Series, where she won but didn't get a contract, she landed 34 significant strikes and 4 takedowns. So I think most likely happens here is Knutsson wins the decision and then probably ends up scoring something like, 80 to 90 fantasy points, which would be safe and an okay score, but it's probably not going to be winning you any GPPs. So not a fight that I'm really looking to target all that heavily. And I'll go back to the top here. So if you guys do just want to pause this to look at what some of my exposures are looking like right now, there it is on screen. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you have not done it, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you want to sign up for any of the tools that we have here at Stokastic, sign up using the link that we have below. Our Sims tool has really helped me be profitable in MMA this year, especially to weed out some of the heavily duped lineups. And it allows me to build lineups with the fighters I like, while also having those lineups be somewhat unique in tournaments. So if you want to sign up, link below in the description box. Also, let me know in the comments how many low price, well, not how many low price fighters, but how many underdogs win on today's card based on the betting odds. And whoever gets the answer right, or however many people get the answer right, put you into a raffle, pick somebody out at random to win a free subscription to OddsShopper. That's our betting site. So that's going to do it for me today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Good luck this weekend.